What's going on, everybody? This is PhDarien. I'm a guy with no PhD, depends on who you ask. All of that stuff. If you like what you see, consider subscribing. At least like the video at a bare minimum, please. It does help the YouTube algorithm, and I would greatly appreciate it. So today I want to talk about the 5 to 6 branches of government that we currently, not branches of government, branches in the DoD or Department of Defense that we currently have. And we're going to start off with the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, the Air Force, somewhat the Coast Guard. During a time of war, they fall under the Navy, and the Space Force. So starting with the Army, the reason the Army is the Army and not the Marine Corps is vastly different. Now, a lot of people think that because we're all in the military, we all do the same job.
Nope.
That couldn't be further from the truth. We are all in the military. I will give you that. 100% we're all in the military. We all have a boot camp. We all have a structure, a foundation, or a base into which our specific branches specialize in. One thing I want to talk about is you have to understand, even in the names of our facilities, right, our military facilities, you can understand at a root level as to why they're called what they are. So let's start with the Army. Armies have forts. Anytime you hear Fort Benning, Fort Bragg, Fort Rucker, Fort whatever you name it, that is speaking to what the Army specialized in at its inceptions. They built many fortresses. They will build a stronghold. They went in as one huge impenetrable unit, and they would build and fortify a specific area to establish a headquarters, if you will, to have a better grasp on the enemy, to put themselves into a better position against the enemy. So it sucks, and you see people storm the beaches of Normandy. They took a lot of losses, but once they got up into these areas, they were able to build forts and fortify and get good strongholds, get their roots in the ground, if you will, and build a fortress. And so when you see Army bases named forts, you go on that base and it's nothing like a fort at all, but that's what it was initially called. And there's a reason for that. Moving on to the Navy. The Navy has a lot of naval air stations, or you will hear many different places I'm talking about refer to themselves as bases. We all call them the base, but base is not really, the same. That goes into a different branch. I'll tell you that in a second, and the reason for it. The Navy has naval stations. Naval Station Norfolk, or Naval Air Station fill in the blank. North Island, Norfolk again, Oceana, NAS, whatever you want to call it. Or even like where I'm at right now, I'm in Italy at NSA, Naval Support Activity. And the reason for that is because we obviously specialize in naval warfare of some sort, something to do with the water. And the whole plan is to leave and not have to come back to home base. So think about that. So the Navy will send their ships out somewhere, and to completely resupply, we will do it at sea. We will resupply at sea, or we will pull into another station, get our supplies, get our fuel, get whatever we need, and then continue on with whatever mission we were sent or tasked with. So when you think about a gas station, you can go on a trip from A to B and hit 3 to 4 different gas stations. Think of that as a naval station. We're always, for the most part, near water. Very little of our bases are not near water. If it's not, it's probably near a lake or some sort of thing that we can still practice the route of being in the Navy. There are exceptions to that, like naval special warfare. Obviously, they don't all have to be by the water. They can be landlocked. But so think about that. Navy has stations where you can go and get resupplied on your way to the mission. Moving on to the Marine Corps. A lot of people think the Marine Corps and the Army are very similar because they have a very similar rank structure. They are both known to be boots on the ground. But understanding the Marines' role, they are an amphibious asset to the Navy. It literally even says Department of the Navy, United States Marine Corps. So they are our small version of our little army. They are their own separate thing, but they still belong to the Navy. There is no Secretary of the Marine Corps. There is just a Secretary of the Navy, and they cover both of those branches. Marines, if you haven't noticed already, their bases start with Camp Lejeune, Camp Allen, Camp Pendleton, whatever you want to call it, they're camps. And camps are roving patrols. Camps are someplace like if you go camping, you don't go camping with your family and build a fort and decide to stay there. You build a campsite, which is a place you don't plan on spending a lot of time at. So once again, the amphibious nature of the Marine Corps is they either inserted via naval assets, right? And then they went on board land in a smaller platoon than what the Army would do. They have like brigades and large groups of people, and you have smaller divisions like platoons. Battalions obviously are huge, and platoons are much smaller. Sorry if you hear that noise. And Marines will actually go somewhere, F stuff up real good. They'll set up camp, do what they have to do, take down the enemy, capture the enemy, take over a stronghold for a short period of time, and then break that campsite back down and continue to move. So they get to move across the field and set up campsites as they go. They never sat there and say, we're just going to sit here and hold this like the Army does. And there's nothing against that. So when you hear all of these camps in their base name, that is why the Marine Corps has bases that are named camp. Moving on to the Air Force. Those places are actually called Air Force Base, blah, 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 right? Kirkland Air Force Base. You have Air Force bases for a reason, because if you think about it, when you're playing baseball, think about that. You start at home base, and the end goal to get points or to score or whatever is to have people come back to where they started, which is home base. The SR-7 Blackbird, one of the most famous aircraft that had the best sortie, it had like 0 issues on real world ops as far as all the sorties that it flew. They always left from one location and came back home to where it started. So the SR-7 Blackbird or any other F-16s, for the most part, this is true for the most part, they will leave where they started, go execute the mission, drop bombs on targets, warheads on foreheads, strafe, do whatever they have to do, get intelligence, and they come back home where they started. So their whole thing about resupplying in the air with tankers and stuff is true, but they do that so they can get enough fuel to do the mission and still come back where they started. Unlike the Navy, we hit places along the way. We hit a lot of gas stations or naval stations. Marines will go ahead and maneuver throughout however they need to get in the best strategic spot and camp along the way and set up and break down campsites. And the Army will go in there as one strong force and grab a stronghold and build fortresses and set up a fort, if you will. The Coast Guard is really no different than the Navy, other than they do the same thing the Navy does, just along the coastlines of our country. Some of them go into other little nations like Puerto Rico and places like that, U.S. territories. But they are more of a littoral asset. They are not meant to be out to sea like the Navy. Like I said, outside of a time of war, they can fall directly underneath the Navy, Chief of Naval Operations. I have no clue what the Space Force does.
Nope.
At this point, I know they are pretty much another entity from the Air Force, and what they do is still kind of weird to me, but I get it. I mean, warfare can exist in space too when it comes to jamming GPSs and intercontinental ballistic missiles and stuff like that fly completely outside of the natural realm of our Air Force. Either way, that's that. But hopefully this answers some questions for you guys who think, what's the different branches of the military and why are they named bases, forts, stations, and camps? So either way, this is PhDarien, and I'm out. Peace.